He turned his back on adopting two black twin girls. 20 years later, the same girls walked into his boardroom and saved the company he nearly lost. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. The winter wind howled outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of Alexander Preston's corner office, 60 stories above Manhattan. At 28, he was the youngest CEO in Pinnacle Technologies history, having founded the company just 6 years earlier with a revolutionary algorithm that changed how Wall Street predicted market trends. Now, as the snow swirled outside, he drummed his fingers on the polished mahogany desk, staring at the woman seated across from him. "I don't understand why you're bringing this to me, Catherine," he said, his voice carrying the unmistakable edge of irritation. "We're a tech company, not a charity." Catherine Wells had been Pinnacle's head of human resources for 3 years. She was one of the few people who could enter Alexander's office unannounced and leave without feeling diminished by his infamous temper. "It's not about charity, Alex," she replied calmly. "It's about doing something meaningful. The girls are 5 years old, twins. Their mother worked for us before she passed away last month, Janelle Davis from accounting." "I vaguely remember her," Alexander lied. He had never bothered to learn the names of employees below a certain pay grade. "She was a single mother, no family to speak of. The twins will be sent to separate foster homes if no one adopts them both together, and you know how unlikely that is." Alexander stood abruptly and walked to the window. The New York skyline, partially obscured by snow, spread out before him like a kingdom. "And what exactly are you suggesting? That I adopt them?" He laughed, the sound hollow in the cavernous office. "I'm running $1 billion company, Catherine. I don't have time for children, let alone twins. You have 3 empty guest rooms in your penthouse, a staff that could help, and more money than you could spend in 10 lifetimes." Catherine persisted. "These girls are bright, Alex. They deserve a chance." Alexander turned back, his expression hardening. "And you think I should upend my life because their mother had the poor judgment to work for my company without making proper arrangements for her children?" Catherine flinched. "That's unnecessarily cruel even for you." "It's realistic," he countered. "Besides, there's the matter of appearance. A single white man adopting 2 black girls? The press would have a field day speculating about my motives." "So you're worried about optics?" Catherine asked, disbelief coloring her voice. "These are children, Alex. Human beings who need a home." Alexander returned to his desk, straightening his already perfectly aligned monitor. "I built this company from nothing, Catherine. Every decision I make affects thousands of employees and millions in shareholder value. I can't afford distractions." "They're not distractions, they're children," Catherine said, rising from her chair. I honestly thought you might see this as an opportunity to do something good with all you've achieved." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "I donate generously to children's charities. That's good enough. Writing checks is easy. Being there for someone isn't." The intercom buzzed, and Alexander's assistant's voice filled the room. "Mr. Preston, your 3 o'clock with the board is ready." "Thank you, Jessica," he responded, then looked at Catherine with finality. "We're done here. Find another solution for those children that doesn't involve me." Catherine gathered her folder and walked to the door, then paused. "You know, Alex, for someone who claims to be so focused on the future, you're terrified of actually building one." She left before he could respond. For a moment, Alexander stood frozen, her words hanging in the air. Then he straightened his tie, pushed the conversation from his mind, and headed to the boardroom. Later that evening, Alexander's private elevator ascended to his penthouse. The silence greeted him like an old friend as he stepped into the vast, minimalist space. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Central Park, now blanketed in snow. He loosened his tie and poured himself 2 fingers of 18-year-old scotch. His phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "I've attached their photo. Just look at them once before you make your final decision." Against his better judgment, Alexander opened the attachment. Two small girls with identical heart-shaped faces and voluminous afro puffs smiled back at him. They wore matching yellow dresses, their arms wrapped around each other. Something unfamiliar stirred in his chest, and he quickly closed the image. He took a long sip of his scotch, savoring the burn. Children were not part of his life plan, especially not children who would require more from him than he was willing to give. His own father had made it abundantly clear that showing affection was weakness, that success required sacrifice. Alexander had learned that lesson well. His phone rang, the board chairman calling to discuss the earlier meeting. Alexander answered, grateful for the distraction from thoughts of wide brown eyes and matching yellow dresses. The next morning, Catherine was waiting in his office when he arrived. "I've made my decision," Alexander said before she could speak. "The answer is no, but I'll set up a trust fund for their education." Catherine's face fell. "A trust fund won't hold them when they have nightmares, Alex. It won't tell them they're loved or valued. It's more than most orphans get," he replied coldly. "Now, if there's nothing else—" "I've arranged for you to meet them," Catherine interrupted. "Just once. They're in the conference room with a social worker." Anger flashed across Alexander's face. "You had no right." "Probably not," she conceded. "But before you write another check to ease your conscience, you should at least look them in the eyes." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Fine. 5 minutes. Then this matter is closed permanently." The conference room was bright with morning sunlight. Two small figures sat at the massive table, their feet dangling far above the floor. A woman in a sensible suit stood nearby, watching Alexander warily as he entered. "Mr. Preston, thank you for taking the time," the social worker began. "This is Zora and Zaria Davis." The twins looked up in unison, their expressions curious but guarded. They were even smaller in person, Alexander thought, dressed in simple jeans and sweaters, their hair styled in neat braids. "Hello," Alexander said awkwardly, remaining near the door. "Are you the one who might be our new daddy?" one of them asked directly. Alexander felt something constrict in his chest. "No, I knew your mother through work." "Oh," the girl replied, disappointment evident in her voice. Her sister remained silent, studying Alexander with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Ms. Wells thought it might be helpful for you to meet," the social worker explained to the girls. "Mr. Preston runs the company where your mommy worked." The quiet twin finally spoke. "Our mommy said her boss was the smartest man in New York." Despite himself, Alexander stepped closer to the table. "Did she?" The girl nodded solemnly. "But she said he didn't know how to smile properly." A startled laugh escaped Alexander before he could stop it. Janelle Davis had clearly had his number. "Your mother was very perceptive." "What's perceptive mean?" the first twin asked. "It means she noticed things that others miss," Alexander explained, surprised to find himself taking a seat at the table. "Which one of you is Zora and which is Zaria?" "I'm Zora," said the more talkative one. "She's Zaria. She's older by 2 minutes, but I'm taller by half an inch." "Important distinctions," Alexander noted seriously, earning a small smile from Zaria. Catherine and the social worker exchanged a glance, then quietly stepped out of the room. Alexander stayed for 45 minutes, not the promised 5. The twins were indeed bright, asking thoughtful questions about his company and telling him about their mother with a frankness that was both heartbreaking and refreshing. When Catherine finally returned, Alexander stood abruptly, the spell broken. "I should get back to work," he said stiffly. "Thank you for talking to us," Zora said, while Zaria simply watched him with those two perceptive eyes. Back in his office, Alexander called Catherine in. "They're extraordinary children," he admitted. "But my answer remains the same. I'm not father material." Catherine's disappointment was palpable. "They'll be separated tomorrow. Different foster homes." Alexander turned away. "I've already authorized the trust fund. It's the best I can do." That night, Alone in his penthouse, Alexander couldn't sleep. The twins' faces haunted him, along with memories of his own cold, loveless childhood. By morning, his decision was unchanged. He was not what those girls needed, no matter what Catherine thought. 2 days later, he learned the twins had been placed in separate homes on opposite sides of the city. He told himself it was for the best and buried himself in work, determined to forget their names and faces. He almost succeeded. 20 years passed like the turning pages of a calendar, each day blending into the next in Alexander Preston's relentless pursuit of success. Pinnacle Technologies had grown into a global powerhouse, expanding from market prediction algorithms to artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and biotechnology. Alexander, now 48, had become a legend in the business world. Brilliant, ruthless, and increasingly isolated. His corner office had only grown larger, now occupying the top floor of Pinnacle Tower, a gleaming spire that dominated the Manhattan skyline. The decor remained minimalist, the only personal touch a small abstract sculpture that Catherine had given him before she retired 5 years earlier. Alexander stared at the quarterly reports on his screen, his brow furrowed. For the third consecutive quarter, Pinnacle's numbers were trending downward. Nothing catastrophic yet, but the pattern was unmistakable. Innovation had stalled. Their competitors were catching up, particularly Nova Dynamics, a younger, hungrier company led by his former protege, Elliot Chen. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Preston, the executive committee is assembled in the boardroom," his assistant announced. "Thank you, Margaret," he replied, gathering his tablet and notes. He paused at the floor-length mirror near his private elevator, noting the silver threading through his dark hair and the lines etched around his eyes. Success had exacted its price. The boardroom fell silent as Alexander entered. 8 executives, his hand-picked leadership team, watched him warily. They knew the numbers as well as he did. "Let's not waste time," Alexander began, taking his seat at the head of the table. "Our innovation pipeline is drying up. R&D has produced nothing groundbreaking in 18 months, and our best talent is being poached by Nova." He looked pointedly at his chief technology officer. "Explain." James Harrington, the CTO, cleared his throat. "It's a combination of factors. The company culture has become risk-averse. Our best minds feel stifled by the current approval processes. And frankly, Nova offers a more collaborative environment." "Collaborative," Alexander repeated, the word tasting bitter. "You mean they coddle their employees with nap pods and ping-pong tables?" "They give their teams autonomy," the chief marketing officer interjected, "and their diversity initiatives are attracting top talent from underrepresented groups." Alexander waved this away. "We have diversity initiatives." "On paper," she replied carefully, "but our leadership remains predominantly white and male. Our approach to innovation hasn't evolved with our size." Alexander's jaw tightened. He'd built Pinnacle through vision and iron will. Now they were suggesting his leadership style was the problem? "What we need," James continued, "is fresh perspective. New blood." "I'm open to suggestions," Alexander said, though his tone suggested otherwise. The chief financial officer slid a folder across the table. "We've identified a small AI research firm that's developed a promising neural network architecture. Their approach could reinvigorate our product line." Alexander opened the folder and scanned the contents. "Horizon Analytics? Never heard of them." "They're small but brilliant," James explained. "Founded by twin sisters who developed their algorithms while still in graduate school. They've turned down acquisition offers from Google and Microsoft." Something prickled at the back of Alexander's neck. "What are their names?" "Dr. Zora and Dr. Zaria Davis," James replied. "MIT graduates, PhDs in computational neuroscience and artificial intelligence. They're quite remarkable." Alexander felt the blood drain from his face. It couldn't be. "Are you all right, sir?" Margaret asked from the doorway, where she'd entered with his coffee. "Fine," he managed, taking a steadying breath. "Have we approached them about acquisition?" They're not interested in being acquired, the CFO explained, but they might consider a strategic partnership. I've arranged a meeting for next week. Alexander nodded mechanically, his mind racing. After 20 years, the twins he'd refused to adopt were now potential business partners. The irony was not lost on him. That's all for now, he said abruptly, standing. James, send me everything we have on Horizon Analytics. Back in his office, Alexander searched for information about the Davis twins. There they were, two brilliant young women with matching serious expressions in their professional headshots. Zora with hair cropped short, Zaria with long braids, both with the same penetrating gaze that had unsettled him 20 years ago. Their company biography mentioned nothing about being orphaned or separated in foster care. Instead, it highlighted their academic achievements and technological innovations. According to the press coverage, they had reunited in college after being raised in different households, then founded Horizon Analytics together 5 years ago. Alexander closed his laptop and walked to the window. Had they succeeded despite him, or to spite him? Did they even remember that brief meeting in the conference room? More importantly, did they know who he was? The partnership meeting was scheduled for Tuesday morning. Alexander spent the weekend obsessively reviewing Horizon's technology, impressed despite himself. Their neural network architecture was indeed revolutionary, combining emotional intelligence processing with decision-making algorithms in a way that could transform Pinnacle's entire product line. Tuesday arrived, and Alexander found himself uncharacteristically nervous. He adjusted his tie for the third time as Margaret announced, "Dr. Davis and Dr. Davis are here to see you." They entered his office with the confident stride of people accustomed to commanding attention. Both wore tailored pantsuits, Zora in deep blue, Zaria in charcoal gray. Their natural hair formed voluminous afros, Zora's shaped into a perfect sphere, Zaria's swept up in an elegant pompadour. At 25, they were stunning women with the poised demeanor of those who knew exactly what they were worth. Dr. Davis, Alexander greeted, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming." "Mr. Preston," Zora replied, her handshake firm. "We've been looking forward to this meeting." "Have you?" Alexander asked, gesturing for them to sit. "I understood you'd turned down meetings with other major tech companies." "We have," Zaria confirmed, her voice softer than her sister's but no less assured. "But Pinnacle presents a unique opportunity." Alexander studied their faces, searching for any sign of recognition. "How so?" Zora smiled, a calculating expression that reminded Alexander uncomfortably of himself. "Your market position, combined with our technology, could reshape the industry. But we're not interested in being absorbed and forgotten. We want a true partnership." "With very specific terms," Zaria added, opening her tablet. As they outlined their proposal, Alexander was increasingly impressed. They weren't just brilliant technologists. They were shrewd businesswomen who had thought through every angle of a potential partnership. "Your terms are unusual," he noted when they finished. "You want to maintain autonomy within Pinnacle's structure." "Our innovation thrives on our independence," Zora explained. "We've seen too many promising startups get swallowed by corporate bureaucracy." "Companies like yours," Zaria added pointedly. There it was, a flash of something in her eyes that suggested she knew exactly who he was. Alexander felt exposed in a way he hadn't in decades. "I've reviewed your technology," he said, redirecting the conversation. "It's impressive, but I'm curious. What inspired your approach to emotional intelligence in AI? It's not a common focus." The twins exchanged a glance before Zora answered. "We grew up in the foster system, Mr. Preston, separated from each other. Understanding human emotions and connections became a survival skill. When we reunited," Zaria continued, "we discovered we'd both been developing frameworks for emotional pattern recognition. It seemed natural to apply that to artificial intelligence." Alexander nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "And how did you find each other again?" "Our mother left letters for us," Zora explained, her expression carefully neutral. To be delivered when we turned 18. They included information about each other and a small inheritance that funded our education. Janelle Davis, Alexander said softly. She worked in accounting at Pinnacle. Both women stiffened. Zaria's eyes narrowed. You remember her? I do, Alexander admitted. And I remember meeting you both briefly after she passed away. Yes, Zora said, her voice cool. We remember that meeting too, Mr. Preston. The tension in the room thickened. Alexander cleared his throat. Your proposal warrants serious consideration. I'd like my team to review the technical details more thoroughly. Of course, Zaria replied. We'll have our team coordinate with yours. As they stood to leave, Alexander found himself unable to let them go without saying more. I want you to know… Mr. Preston, Zora interrupted, her tone businesslike. Let's keep this professional. The past is irrelevant to our potential partnership. Alexander nodded, chastened. Of course. Thank you for your time. After they left, he remained at his desk, staring at the space they had occupied. 20 years ago, he had dismissed them as a distraction from his ambitions. Now they might be the key to saving the company he had sacrificed everything to build. The irony was almost too perfect. Alexander couldn't sleep that night. He paced his penthouse, a glass of scotch in hand, replaying the meeting with the Davis twins. They had grown into formidable women, confident, brilliant, and clearly aware of who he was and the choice he had made 20 years ago. The quiet resentment in their eyes had been unmistakable, though professionally masked. He paused at the wall of windows overlooking the city. His reflection stared back at him, successful, wealthy, and utterly alone. No wife, no children, no real friends, just a legacy of technological innovation that was now faltering. His phone buzzed with a text from James. Technical assessment of Horizon's AI is complete. It's everything they claimed and more. We need this partnership. Alexander sighed. Pinnacle needed the Davis twins, but would they truly partner with the man who had refused to give them a home? Their proposal suggested they were willing to set aside personal history for business, but Alexander knew better than most how personal vendettas could lurk beneath professional veneers. After another sleepless night, he called Catherine Wells. Though retired, she had remained one of the few people Alexander maintained contact with. "This is unexpected," she answered, surprise evident in her voice. The great Alexander Preston calling an old employee on a Sunday. "You were never just an employee, Catherine," he replied. "I need your perspective on something." "I'm listening." Alexander hesitated, then plunged ahead. "The Davis twins. You remember them?" A long pause. "The girls you refused to adopt. Of course I remember them. Why?" "They've resurfaced, as brilliant AI researchers with technology Pinnacle desperately needs." Catherine's laugh held no humor. "Oh, that's rich. The universe has quite a sense of irony. They know who I am. They remember. I'm not surprised. That kind of rejection leaves a mark." Catherine's voice softened. "What do you want from me, Alex?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Absolution, maybe. I can't give you that. Only they could, and I doubt they're interested." She sighed. "What are you going to do?" "Make the deal. Pinnacle needs their technology. And if they're using this as an opportunity for revenge?" The question had been haunting him. "It's a risk I'll have to take." After ending the call, Alexander made a decision. If he was going to navigate this partnership, he needed to understand who the Davis twins had become. Not just their professional accomplishments, but their personal journeys. He spent the day researching, going far beyond the standard corporate background checks. He found articles about their foster care experiences. Zora had been placed with 5 different families before finding stability with a professor and his wife in Queens. Zaria had fared somewhat better, staying with the same family in Brooklyn, though interviews hinted at emotional distance from her foster parents. A feature in MIT's alumni magazine described their emotional reunion as freshmen, having both earned full scholarships. They had recognized each other instantly, despite 8 years of separation. The article quoted Zora, "Finding each other again was like finding a missing piece of myself. Everything made sense suddenly." Alexander's research revealed other details. Zora had a reputation for being the more outspoken sister, driving their business development, while Zaria was the technical genius behind their most groundbreaking algorithms. They lived together in a brownstone in Brooklyn and were known for mentoring young girls interested in STEM fields, particularly those in foster care. Most telling was an interview they had given to a tech magazine just 3 months earlier. When asked about their success despite challenging beginnings, Zaria had said, "Sometimes the worst rejections lead you to your true path. Every no we received pushed us to prove ourselves." Alexander wondered if that statement had been directed at him. The next morning, he called a meeting with his executive team to discuss the Horizon partnership. "Their technology is exceptional," James confirmed. "Exactly what we need to regain our competitive edge, but their terms are unprecedented: autonomy within our corporate structure, direct board representation, and a significant equity stake. They know their worth," Alexander observed. The CFO frowned. "It's more than that. These terms feel personal, almost like they're trying to establish themselves as equals to you specifically, Mr. Preston." Alexander met his gaze steadily. "Perhaps they are." "Do you know them somehow?" James asked, confusion evident. Alexander considered how much to reveal. "Their mother worked for Pinnacle many years ago. I met them briefly as children." The room fell silent as the executives exchanged glances, sensing there was more to the story. "Regardless," Alexander continued, "their terms are acceptable if their technology is as transformative as we believe. Prepare the partnership agreement." As the meeting concluded, James lingered. "There's something else you should know. According to our intelligence, Nova Dynamics has also approached them." Alexander felt a surge of alarm. "Recently?" "Yesterday afternoon, after they left our meeting, Elliot Chen personally invited them to dinner." Elliot Chen, Alexander's former protege and now his fiercest competitor. Of course he would swoop in at this critical moment. "Find out what Nova offered them," Alexander ordered, "and set up another meeting with the Davis twins. Tomorrow." The next day, Alexander waited tensely in the conference room. When the twins arrived, they were accompanied by a sharp-eyed attorney who had not been present at their first meeting. "Thank you for coming," Alexander greeted them. "I understand you met with Elliot Chen yesterday." Zora raised an eyebrow. "You keep close tabs on your potential partners." "Pinnacle takes its partnership seriously," Alexander replied evenly. "I assume Nova made a counteroffer?" "They did," Zaria confirmed. "More generous than your initial terms." Alexander studied them carefully. "Yet you're here. Why?" The twins exchanged a glance before Zora answered. "We're evaluating all our options thoroughly. Business decisions of this magnitude shouldn't be rushed, or made emotionally," Alexander added, the words hanging meaningfully in the air. Zaria's expression remained neutral. "We've never been accused of making emotional business decisions, Mr. Preston." "I'm not suggesting you would," he said carefully. "But I believe in addressing potential conflicts directly. Our previous connection might complicate this partnership." "Previous connection?" their attorney asked, looking confused. Zora smiled thinly. "Mr. Preston briefly met us after our mother died. He was her employer." "It was more than that," Alexander said quietly. "I was asked to consider adopting you both. I declined." The attorney's eyes widened, but the twins' expressions remained composed. "Ancient history," Zora said dismissively. "We're here to discuss a business partnership, not to revisit childhood disappointments." Alexander leaned forward. "Is it ancient history? Because Nova's offer came after our meeting, which suggests you may be using their interest as leverage, or perhaps considering them as an alternative if partnering with me proves too uncomfortable." "We're entrepreneurs, Mr. Preston," Zaria replied coolly. "Using all available leverage is simply good business. You of all people should appreciate that." "I do," Alexander acknowledged. "But I need to know that any partnership between us will be based on mutual benefit, not resentment or revenge." "Revenge?" Zora laughed, the sound sharp-edged. "That would require caring about your opinion, Mr. Preston. We stopped doing that a long time ago." The words stung more than Alexander expected. "Fair enough. Then let's discuss revised terms." He outlined a new proposal: more equity, guaranteed autonomy, and board positions for both sisters. The offer was extraordinarily generous, exceeding even Nova's terms according to his intelligence. The twins listened attentively, their faces revealing nothing. When he finished, they conferred briefly with their attorney. "We'll need time to review this," Zora finally said, "and we're still considering Nova's offer." "Of course," Alexander replied, keeping his tone neutral despite his growing anxiety. "How much time do you need?" "We'll give you our decision by Friday," Zaria said, gathering her materials. As they prepared to leave, Alexander made a decision. "Before you go, I'd like to speak with you both privately. Just 5 minutes." Their attorney frowned, but Zora nodded. 5 minutes. After the others had left, an uncomfortable silence filled the conference room. Alexander struggled to find the right words. "I want to apologize," he finally said, "for the decision I made 20 years ago. It was short-sighted and selfish." "It was a business decision," Zora replied, her voice carefully controlled. "You weighed the costs and benefits and determined we weren't worth the investment." "That's not—" "It's exactly what happened," Zaria interrupted, showing more emotion than she had throughout the negotiations. "We were an inconvenience, a potential drain on your time and resources." Alexander winced. "I was young and obsessed with building Pinnacle. I told myself I wouldn't be a good father." "And that absolved you?" Zora asked. "We were separated for 8 years, Mr. Preston. Do you have any idea what that's like? To have the other half of yourself torn away?" "No," he admitted quietly. "I don't. We built our lives and our company despite you, not because of you," Zaria continued. "So you don't get to apologize now because you need something from us." Alexander nodded slowly. "You're right. My timing is suspect, but the apology is sincere, regardless of whether you accept it or our partnership offer." The twins stood in unison. 5 minutes are up," Zora said. "We'll let you know our decision on Friday." After they left, Alexander remained in the conference room feeling hollowed out. The twins' success was a testament to their resilience and brilliance. They had overcome not just the loss of their mother but his rejection as well, turning pain into motivation. Part of him admired them for it. Another part wondered what might have been if he had made a different choice 20 years ago. Would they have still become the remarkable women they were today? Or would his cold, work-obsessed parenting have damaged them? Perhaps his rejection had been a blessing in disguise. Somehow, that thought provided no comfort at all. Friday arrived with an atmosphere of tension throughout Pinnacle's executive floor. Alexander had barely slept all week, his mind vacillating between strategies to secure the Davis twins' partnership and haunting thoughts of what might have been. He had shared the full story with James, needing at least one ally who understood the personal dimensions complicating the negotiations. "They'll choose Nova," Alexander predicted grimly as he and James waited in the conference room. "It's the rational decision." James shook his head. "Their technology is emotion-based. Maybe they don't always make the rational choice." "That would be ironic," Alexander mused, "given that my rejection of them was coldly rational." "Was it?" James asked. "Or were you afraid?" Alexander had no chance to respond as the conference room door opened. The Davis twins entered, their attorney conspicuously absent. Alexander's pulse quickened. Was that a good sign or a bad one? "Thank you for meeting us," Zora began, her expression unreadable. "We've reached our decision. Alexander nodded, steeling himself. And? We're declining both offers, Zarya announced. Pinnacle's and Nova's. The statement hit Alexander like a physical blow. I see, he managed, his voice strained. May I ask why? Zora placed a folder on the table. We've decided on a third option. We're offering to acquire Pinnacle Technologies. For a moment, Alexander thought he had misheard. Excuse me? It's a reverse acquisition, Zora explained calmly. Horizon would become the parent company of Pinnacle, with us as co-CEOs. James made a choking sound. That's unprecedented. Horizon is a fraction of Pinnacle's size. Size isn't everything, Zarya replied. Our technology represents the future. Pinnacle's market position is declining. Our valuation reflects that reality. Alexander fought to control his expression. This is absurd. The board would never approve. Actually, Zora countered, sliding another document across the table, we've already spoken with your major shareholders. Many are receptive, given Pinnacle's recent performance. Alexander's shock gave way to anger as he realized what had happened. While he had been agonizing over their decision, the twins had been orchestrating a takeover attempt. They hadn't been leveraging Nova against Pinnacle. They had been using both companies to gauge their own value and Pinnacle's vulnerabilities. This isn't a business strategy, he said coldly. It's revenge. It's business, Zora corrected. Your company needs our technology to survive. We're offering a solution that benefits your shareholders while preserving our vision. By removing me, Alexander stated flatly. By repositioning you, Zarya clarified. You would remain on the board, but no longer as CEO. Alexander stood abruptly. This meeting is over. If you want to attempt a hostile takeover, you'll need more than a few disgruntled shareholders. The twins remained seated, apparently unfazed by his reaction. We anticipated your response, Zora said. That's why we've prepared this. She handed him another document, an analysis of Pinnacle's weaknesses and a detailed plan for exploiting them if Alexander rejected their offer. It included releasing their technology exclusively to Nova, targeting Pinnacle's key clients, and hiring away their top talent. This is blackmail, Alexander said through clenched teeth. This is leverage, Zarya corrected, something you taught the business world to respect. James, who had been reviewing the documents, looked up with concern. Alex, their plan could seriously damage Pinnacle, regardless of whether their acquisition succeeds. Alexander felt trapped. The twins had outmaneuvered him completely, using his own tactics against him. The irony was almost too perfect. He had refused to make them his daughters, and now they were positioning themselves to take his company. I need time to consider this, he finally said. You have until Monday, Zora replied, standing. We'll expect your answer by noon. After they left, Alexander sank back into his chair, stunned. They planned this from the beginning, he said to James. Every meeting, every negotiation, it was all leading to this. What are you going to do? James asked. Alexander stared at the acquisition proposal. I don't know yet, but I won't surrender Pinnacle without a fight. That evening, Alexander called an emergency meeting with his most trusted board members and executives. The response was mixed. Some were outraged at the twins' audacity, while others saw merit in their proposal given Pinnacle's recent struggles. Their technology really is revolutionary, the head of R&D admitted, and our innovation pipeline is dry. So we partner with them, Alexander insisted. We don't hand them control of the company I built. The partnership terms were generous, the board chairman acknowledged. Perhaps you should have accepted them when offered. The implication was clear. Alexander's personal history with the twins had clouded his judgment, and now Pinnacle was paying the price. The meeting adjourned with no clear strategy, leaving Alexander feeling more isolated than ever. He returned to his penthouse and poured himself a large scotch. The city lights twinkled below, indifferent to his crisis. His phone rang. Catherine. I heard what happened, she said without preamble. James called me. They want to take my company, Catherine, Alexander replied, his voice hollow. The ultimate revenge. Is it revenge, or is it business? She asked. You'd do the same in their position? That's what they said. He laughed bitterly. Maybe they learned too well from my example. What will you do? Alexander stared into his scotch. Fight, I suppose. It's what I've always done. Perhaps, Catherine suggested carefully, there's another approach, one that doesn't involve fighting. Surrender? He asked incredulously. Reconciliation, she corrected. You've spent 20 years regretting your decision not to adopt them. Maybe this is your chance to make amends. Alexander scoffed. By giving them my company? That's a high price for redemption. Is it? Catherine challenged. What else are you saving it for? You have no heirs, Alex. No family. Just an empire that's beginning to crumble. Her words struck a nerve. Alexander had built Pinnacle with singular focus, sacrificing everything else on the altar of success. Now, as he approached 50, he had begun to question what it had all been for. Think about it, Catherine said gently. Maybe there's a solution that serves both your interests. After she hung up, Alexander spent hours staring at the city, turning possibilities over in his mind. By dawn, he had made a decision, not one his business instincts approved, but perhaps one his long-dormant conscience could live with. Sunday afternoon, he texted both Zora and Zaria. I'd like to meet, not at Pinnacle, somewhere neutral, just the three of us. They agreed, somewhat to his surprise, suggesting a quiet tea house in Brooklyn. When Alexander arrived, they were already seated at a corner table, both watching him with guarded expressions. Thank you for coming, he said, taking the third chair. We were curious about what you might say outside the corporate environment, Zora admitted. Alexander took a deep breath. I want to understand something first. Is this truly about business, or is it about settling an old score? The twins exchanged a glance before Zaria answered. Both, in a way. Your rejection shaped our lives, forced us to become self-reliant, driven. The business strategy is sound, but we won't pretend there isn't satisfaction in the symmetry. Alexander nodded slowly. Fair enough. I have a counter-proposal. We're listening, Zora said. A true merger, not an acquisition. Equal leadership. Both of you and me as co-CEOs with clearly defined areas of responsibility. I handle legacy operations. You lead innovation and future development. The twins looked surprised. That's not what we expected, Zaria admitted. I'm trying something new, Alexander said wryly. I've spent 20 years wondering what might have happened if I'd made a different choice when you were 5. I can't change that past, but perhaps we can build something together now. Why would you agree to share power? Zora asked suspiciously. That's not the Alexander Preston we've read about. Because Pinnacle needs your vision, he admitted. And because I'm tired of wondering what I missed by choosing the company over other possibilities. A long silence followed as the twins communicated in that wordless way unique to those who shared both DNA and formative experiences. Finally, Zora spoke. We'll consider it, but we'll need details. Governance structure, decision-making protocols, succession planning. Of course, Alexander agreed. I'll have a draft prepared by tomorrow. As they finished their tea, the conversation shifted subtly from business to more personal matters. Alexander found himself asking about their experiences growing up separated, their reunion, and their path to becoming AI pioneers. We developed our emotional intelligence algorithms partly to understand ourselves, Zaria explained, to quantify and process the impact of early trauma. Our foster experiences were mixed, Zora added. But finding each other again in college was like becoming whole. Alexander listened, truly listened, perhaps for the first time in his relationship with them. He found himself sharing, too, about his own lonely childhood with emotionally distant parents, his drive to succeed at all costs, and his growing realization of what that single-mindedness had cost him. "I've succeeded beyond my wildest dreams," he confessed, "and failed in ways I'm only beginning to understand." As they parted outside the tea house, something had shifted between them. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. "We'll review your proposal tomorrow," Zora said. "Objectively." "That's all I can ask," Alexander replied. Walking back to his car, Alexander felt lighter than he had in years. The Davis twins might still take control of his company. They might reject his counteroffer entirely. But for the first time, he was facing the consequences of his past choices honestly, without hiding behind corporate strategy or rationalization. And somehow, that felt like progress. The next morning, Alexander arrived at Pinnacle Tower earlier than usual. The building was quiet, most employees not yet at their desks. He preferred it this way, the calm before the corporate storm, when he could think without interruption. He had spent most of the night drafting his counter-proposal, a three-way leadership structure unlike anything Pinnacle had ever considered. The document outlined clear divisions of responsibility while ensuring that major decisions required consensus from all three CEOs. It was unorthodox, perhaps even radical, but Alexander believed it might satisfy both the twins' desire for control and his need to remain involved with the company he had built. James arrived at 8, looking concerned. "The board is getting nervous. Rumors about the Davis twins' acquisition offer are circulating." "Let them circulate," Alexander replied calmly. "By this afternoon we'll have a different announcement to make." "You're confident they'll accept your counteroffer?" Alexander straightened a stack of papers on his desk. "Not confident. Hopeful." James raised an eyebrow at this uncharacteristic uncertainty. "If they reject it? Then we fight," Alexander said simply, "but I don't think it will come to that." At 11, Margaret announced the Davis twins' arrival. They entered Alexander's office with the same poised confidence they had shown in previous meetings, though he thought he detected a subtle difference in their demeanor, a cautious openness that hadn't been present before. "Thank you for coming," he greeted them, gesturing to the seating area rather than the more formal conference table. "I've prepared the details of my proposal." As they reviewed the document, Alexander studied their reactions. Zora's brow furrowed at certain sections, while Zarya tilted her head slightly when something intrigued her, mannerisms so distinct and yet complementary, like different aspects of the same personality. "This is thorough," Zora finally said, looking up from the document, "and surprisingly equitable." "You sound shocked," Alexander noted with a hint of amusement. "We are," Zarya admitted. "Your reputation suggested you'd never willingly share power." "Reputations evolve," he replied. "As do people." Zora tapped the document. "This three-way leadership structure, it's unusual. Most companies struggle with 2 co-CEOs, let alone 3. "Most companies don't have our particular situation," Alexander countered. "This structure acknowledges both your technological vision and my operational experience. It's not conventional, but neither is our history." The twins exchanged one of their silent communications before Zarya spoke. "We need to discuss some modifications. The consensus requirement for major decisions could lead to deadlock." "A valid concern," Alexander acknowledged. "What do you suggest?" For the next 2 hours, they negotiated specific points of the agreement, their conversation moving between hard-nosed business terms and more nuanced discussions of corporate philosophy. Alexander found himself impressed by their strategic thinking and their ability to anticipate potential problems in the proposed structure. "You've clearly studied organizational psychology," he observed after Zora outlined a particularly insightful modification to the decision-making protocol. "We both minored in it," Zarya explained. "Understanding human systems is as important as understanding technological ones." By early afternoon, they had reached agreement on most points, with the company's attorneys documenting the changes. The revised structure would be called a strategic integration rather than a merger or acquisition, a new model that preserved both companies' strengths while creating a unified leadership vision. "There's one more thing," Alexander said as they prepared to finalize the agreement. "I'd like to establish a foundation in your mother's name, focused on supporting education for children in foster care, particularly in STEM fields." The twins stilled, genuine surprise registering on their faces. "Why?" Zora asked bluntly. Alexander met her gaze steadily. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because Janelle Davis deserves to be remembered for more than being an employee who died too young." Zaria's expression softened slightly. "That's unexpectedly thoughtful." "I'm capable of thoughtfulness," Alexander said dryly, "just out of practice." For the first time since they had re-entered his life, Zora smiled at him, a small, tentative gesture but authentic. "We'd want to be involved in structuring the foundation." "I was counting on it," Alexander replied. With the major points resolved, they agreed to present the integration plan to Pinnacle's board that afternoon. James arranged an emergency session, and by 4 o'clock the executive team and board members had assembled in the main conference room. Alexander began the presentation, outlining the strategic rationale for integrating with Horizon Analytics. He deliberately avoided mentioning his personal history with the twins, focusing instead on the complementary strengths of the two companies. "This integration represents Pinnacle's future," he concluded, then introduced the Davis twins. "Dr. Zora and Dr. Zaria Davis will now explain their revolutionary AI architecture and how it will transform our product line." The twins delivered a compelling presentation, their technical brilliance evident as they explained complex algorithms in terms the board could understand. Their vision for applying emotional intelligence frameworks to Pinnacle's existing technologies generated visible excitement among the executives. "Questions?" Alexander asked when they finished. The board chairman spoke first. "This is very different from the acquisition proposal we heard rumors about. What changed?" Zora answered smoothly. "Further analysis convinced us that a true integration would better serve both companies' interests. Pinnacle's market position combined with our technological innovation creates synergy that an acquisition might disrupt." The CFO raised concerns about the 3 CEO structure, but Alexander addressed them with confidence, explaining how the clear division of responsibilities would prevent conflicts. "This is uncharted territory," he acknowledged. "But so was founding Pinnacle 20 years ago. Innovation sometimes requires rethinking established structures." After a thorough discussion, the board voted to approve the integration plan in principle, subject to final legal review. As the meeting adjourned, Alexander felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The company would move forward, evolving rather than being torn apart by conflict. The twins lingered after the others had left, their expressions thoughtful. "That went well," Alexander observed. "Better than expected," Zora agreed. "Though several board members seemed surprised by your willingness to share leadership." "I've surprised myself," Alexander admitted. "But it feels right." "Does it?" Zaria asked, studying him intently. "Or is this just a strategic retreat, giving up some control to avoid losing everything?" The question struck at the heart of Alexander's internal struggle. Was his counterproposal merely a tactical maneuver, or did it represent a genuine change in his approach to both business and life? "Both, perhaps," he answered honestly. "I began thinking tactically, but somewhere along the way I realized this integration offers something I didn't know I wanted, a chance to build something meaningful with the two of you." His candor seemed to catch them off guard. After a moment, Zora nodded slowly. "Fair enough. We all have mixed motives." "Speaking of which," Alexander ventured, "was your initial acquisition proposal truly just business?" The twins exchanged a glance before Zaria answered. "Not entirely. We wanted to see how you'd react, if you'd recognize the irony of the situation." "I recognized it," Alexander said wryly. "It was impossible to miss." "And yet you didn't just fight back," Zora noted. "You found a third path." "I'm learning," he replied simply. As they prepared to leave, Alexander was struck by a sudden impulse. "Would you join me for dinner tonight? Not to discuss business, just to talk." The invitation surprised all three of them. The twins hesitated, then Zarya nodded. "All right, but somewhere quiet, away from the corporate world." "I know just the place," Alexander said. That evening they met at a small, unassuming Italian restaurant in Greenwich Village, a far cry from the upscale establishments where Alexander typically entertained business associates. The owner, Mario, greeted Alexander like an old friend, leading them to a corner table partially secluded by a wooden lattice covered in artificial grapevines. "You're a regular here?" Zora asked, looking around at the homey decor. Alexander nodded. "For 20 years. It's one of the few places in New York where I'm just another customer, not Alexander Preston, CEO." They ordered wine, and as they waited for their meals, an awkward silence descended. After 2 decades of separation and days of intense negotiation, they were suddenly without agenda or purpose, just 3 people with a complicated shared history trying to navigate unfamiliar personal terrain. "Tell me about your foster families," Alexander finally said, "if you're comfortable sharing." The twins exchanged a glance before Zora began. "I had 5 placements in 8 years. Some were challenging." "She means awful," Zarya interjected softly. "The 3rd family used foster children as free labor for their small business. The 4th was emotionally abusive." Alexander winced. "I'm sorry." "My final placement was better," Zora continued. "A professor and his wife. They encouraged my interest in mathematics and computing." "And you?" Alexander asked Zarya. "I stayed with one family in Brooklyn," she replied. "They were stable but distant. They provided for my physical needs but weren't emotionally available. I spent most of my time at the library or the school computer lab." Alexander nodded, a familiar ache building in his chest. "And you found each other in college?" Their faces brightened simultaneously. "Our first day at MIT," Zora confirmed. "We had both earned full scholarships but didn't know the other would be there. I was in the freshman orientation when I felt this pull. I turned around, and there she was." "We recognized each other instantly," Zarya added, "even after 8 years apart." "That must have been extraordinary," Alexander said quietly. "It was like finding a piece of myself I didn't know was missing," Zora explained. "Suddenly everything made sense. Why I'd always felt incomplete, why I'd struggled to connect with others." "We moved into a dorm room together that day," Zarya continued. "Started finishing each other's sentences within a week. Our roommates thought we were telepathic." As they shared more stories, their academic achievements, the founding of Horizon, the challenges they had overcome, Alexander found himself deeply moved. These remarkable women had emerged from circumstances that might have broken others, using their pain as fuel for their ambitions rather than allowing it to define them. "You've accomplished so much," he said finally, "despite everything." "Because of everything," Zora corrected. "Adversity can be a powerful motivator." Alexander nodded, thinking of his own driven path to success. "I understand that better than most." As the evening progressed, the conversation became more personal. Alexander shared stories from Pinnacle's early days, the sleepless nights, the near failures, the moments of breakthrough. The twins listened with genuine interest, occasionally asking questions that revealed their own entrepreneurial experiences. By the time dessert arrived, the initial awkwardness had largely dissipated, replaced by a cautious but growing connection. They were not family. Too much time and too many choices stood between them and that possibility. But they were no longer merely business associates either. They were 3 people with a shared past and perhaps a shared future, finding their way toward some new form of relationship. 2 weeks after the board approved the integration plan, Pinnacle Technologies and Horizon Analytics made the announcement public. The business press exploded with analysis and speculation, financial experts debating the wisdom of the unconventional three-CEO structure, while technology journalists celebrated the potential of the Davis twins' emotional intelligence algorithms. Alexander had braced himself for scrutiny, but even he was surprised by the media frenzy. CNBC ran a special segment titled Preston's Power Play, portraying the integration as his strategic masterstroke rather than the compromise it had actually been. Forbes published a glowing profile of the Davis twins, dubbing them the sisters revolutionizing artificial intelligence. The Wall Street Journal took a more measured approach, acknowledging the risks of the unusual leadership structure while praising the technological synergies. None of the coverage mentioned the personal history connecting the three co-CEOs, a fact for which Alexander was grateful. He, Zora, and Zaria had agreed to keep that aspect of their relationship private, at least for now. The integration process moved forward with remarkable smoothness, considering the complexity involved. Horizon's team of brilliant young engineers and data scientists merged with Pinnacle's more established technical workforce, creating new collaborative teams focused on incorporating emotional intelligence into Pinnacle's existing product line. Alexander, true to his word, focused on operations and client relationships, leveraging his decades of business connections to reassure nervous stakeholders. Zora handled innovation strategy and business development, her outgoing personality and visionary thinking making her the natural public face of the new initiative. Zaria led the technical implementation, working closely with both companies' engineering teams to merge their disparate systems and approaches. Their complementary strengths created a surprisingly effective leadership team. Where Alexander might once have bulldozed through opposition, he now found himself pausing to consider the twins' perspectives. And while the sisters had initially approached Pinnacle with a degree of righteous retribution in mind, they now seemed genuinely invested in building something transformative together. 6 weeks into the integration, they gathered in what had once been Alexander's private conference room but was now a shared leadership space. The walls that had displayed only Alexander's achievements now featured a timeline of both companies' milestones, symbolizing their joined histories. Nova just announced quarterly results, James reported, bringing up the numbers on the main screen. They're down 12%. The market is starting to recognize that our integration gives us the edge. Zora studied the figures with satisfaction. Elliot Chen must be kicking himself for not securing our technology when he had the chance. He underestimated you, Alexander observed. A mistake I nearly made myself. Good thing you're a quick learner, Zaria remarked with a hint of a smile. Their working relationship had evolved into something approaching friendship over the past weeks. The dinner at Mario's had been followed by other informal meetings, coffee before official workdays began, occasional shared lunches in the executive dining room. They were building trust incrementally, one conversation at a time. The development team has the prototype ready for the first integrated product, Zaria announced, switching topics. They're calling it Empath AI. Appropriate, Alexander nodded. When can we see it? Tomorrow afternoon. The engineering team wants to run final diagnostics before the demonstration. Zora added, Marketing is already preparing the launch strategy. The focus group's response to the concept has been overwhelmingly positive. As they continued discussing the upcoming product launch, Alexander found himself struck by how naturally they had fallen into this shared leadership role. The structure that had seemed so radical on paper was working in practice, each of them contributing their unique strengths while respecting the other's domains. After the meeting, Alexander lingered, watching as the twins gathered their materials. I'd like to invite you both to dinner this weekend, he said. At my home. There's something I want to discuss outside the office environment. The sisters exchanged a quick glance, that silent communication that never failed to fascinate Alexander. Is everything all right? Zaria asked. Everything's fine, he assured them. Just something personal I'd like your input on. They agreed, curiosity evident in their expressions. Alexander spent the rest of the week wondering if he was making the right decision. The idea had been forming in his mind for weeks, but voicing it would make it real, a commitment he couldn't easily retract. Saturday evening arrived and Alexander found himself uncharacteristically nervous as he prepared for the twins' visit. His penthouse, like his office, had always been a monument to his singular achievements. Stark, minimalist, impressive, but impersonal. Recently, though, he had begun to introduce small changes. A few carefully selected pieces of art that spoke to him emotionally rather than as investments. Books on subjects beyond business and technology. Even a few plants, bringing literal life into the space. The elevator announced their arrival at precisely 7. Alexander greeted them at the door, noting with interest that they had dressed similarly but not identically. Zora in a royal blue jumpsuit, Zarya in a patterned dress of the same color family, both with their natural hair styled in elaborate updos. "Welcome," he said, ushering them inside. "Can I offer you a drink?" "White wine, if you have it," Zora replied, while Zarya requested sparkling water. They moved to the living area, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular view of Central Park and the city beyond. The twins took in the space with evident curiosity, noting the subtle changes since their first and only previous visit for a brief strategy session. "You've added personal touches," Zarya observed, gesturing to a vibrant, abstract painting that now dominated one wall. Alexander nodded. "I'm trying to remember there's more to life than quarterly results." "A revolutionary concept," Zora teased gently, accepting the wine he offered. Dinner was served at a glass table positioned to maximize the view. The meal, prepared by Alexander's personal chef, who discreetly disappeared after serving, was excellent, the conversation flowing more easily than any of them might have expected months ago. As they finished dessert, Alexander steered the conversation toward the purpose of the evening. "I've been thinking about the Janelle Davis Foundation," he began. "The concept we discussed is part of our agreement." The twins nodded, their expressions turning more serious. "We've been developing some ideas for its structure," Zora said. "So have I," Alexander replied, "but I've also been thinking about something more personal." He took a breath, then continued. "I'd like to make you both the primary beneficiaries of my estate." Silence fell over the table, both women looking genuinely shocked. "What?" Zora finally managed. "I have no family," Alexander explained. "No children, no siblings, no close relatives. I've accumulated significant wealth beyond my Pinnacle shares, and I've been questioning what will happen to it when I'm gone." "But why us?" Zarya asked, her voice quiet. "After everything?" Alexander met her gaze steadily. "Perhaps because of everything. You are not my daughters. That opportunity is long past. But you are connected to me by a history that, while complicated, is real, and I've come to respect and admire you both tremendously." The twins exchanged one of their silent communications before Zora spoke. "This feels like compensation for not adopting us." "It's not," Alexander said firmly. "I can't undo that decision or compensate for its consequences. This is about the future, not the past. About recognizing that you two, more than anyone else in my life, share my vision and values for what technology can achieve." "We need time to think about this," Zarya said carefully. "It's unexpected." "Of course," Alexander nodded. "There's no rush. I just wanted you to know my intentions." The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but an undercurrent of thoughtfulness remained. As the evening concluded and the twins prepared to leave, Zora paused at the door. "Why now?" she asked. "You're not ill, are you?" Alexander smiled slightly. "No, I'm perfectly healthy. Just evolving, I suppose. Recent events have caused me to reevaluate many things." After they left, Alexander stood at the windows watching the city lights twinkle below. He had spoken truthfully. He wasn't ill. But the past few months had brought home the emptiness at the core of his life's achievements. His wealth, his company, his reputation, all would outlast him. But to what end if there was no one who truly cared to carry forward his legacy? The Davis twins were not his family in any traditional sense, but they were perhaps the closest thing to family he would ever have. And in their brilliant minds and determined spirits, he recognized something of himself. The best parts, he hoped, without the coldness that had isolated him for so long. Monday morning brought a return to business as usual, the personal conversation of Saturday night seemingly set aside as they focused on the impending product launch. The prototype demonstration exceeded even their high expectations, the Empath AI system showing remarkable ability to recognize and respond to emotional cues in both text and voice interactions. This will transform customer service applications, Alexander noted, watching as the system adapted its responses based on subtle voice modulations from the test subject. And educational software, Zaria added. Imagine learning programs that can detect when a student is confused or frustrated and adjust accordingly. The market potential is enormous, Zora agreed, but we need to be careful about the ethical implications. This technology could be misused for manipulation if it fell into the wrong hands. Alexander nodded thoughtfully. You're right. We should establish an ethics committee to develop guidelines for its implementation. This suggestion, placing ethical considerations on par with market potential, represented a significant evolution in Alexander's business philosophy. Before the integration, he would have focused solely on monetization, leaving ethical concerns for later consideration, if at all. The twins noticed the change, exchanging a meaningful glance before Zora said, "That's an excellent idea. We should include external experts as well as our own team." As they left the demonstration, Alexander's assistant approached with an urgent message. "Sir, there's a situation developing with the Nova acquisition. Elliot Chen is making a move." Alexander's expression darkened. "What kind of move?" "He's approached several of our major shareholders with a tender offer. Apparently, not everyone is convinced by our integration strategy." The three CEOs exchanged concerned looks. Their leadership experiment was facing its first major external threat, and how they responded would determine not just the company's future but the nature of their still-evolving relationship. Alexander's private conference room, once a sanctuary of solitary decision-making, now hummed with tense energy as he, Zora, and Zaria assembled their crisis team. James provided a detailed briefing on Nova's tender offer, his usual calm demeanor strained. "Elliot is offering a 30% premium on current share prices," he explained, displaying the numbers on the main screen. "He's positioning it as a rescue mission, saving Pinnacle from an untested and risky leadership experiment." Alexander's jaw tightened. Elliot Chen had been his protege, groomed for leadership until a philosophical disagreement about Pinnacle's direction had led to his departure 5 years earlier. Now he was attempting to take control of the company Alexander had built, using the integration with Horizon as his justification. "What's our exposure?" Zora asked, studying the shareholder breakdown with a strategist's eye. "Vulnerable," the CFO admitted. "The integration announcement initially boosted our stock price, but it's settled back as the market waits for concrete results. 23% of shareholders have already indicated interest in Nova's offer. We need 48 hours, Zaria said suddenly, looking up from her tablet. The Empath AI prototype is ready for limited deployment. If we can demonstrate real-world results, it could shift market perception." Alexander nodded. "I'll contact our largest institutional investors personally. Many of them have supported Pinnacle through previous challenges. And I'll prepare a counter-narrative," Zora added. "Nova's tender offer isn't about saving Pinnacle. It's about preventing us from dominating the emotional AI market. We need to make that clear to shareholders and the press." As the team dispersed to implement their respective strategies, Alexander found himself impressed by the twins' composure under pressure. They had faced down his attempted rejection of their initial partnership, orchestrated a near takeover of Pinnacle, and now stood shoulder to shoulder with him against an external threat, all without losing their focus or resolve. "I should call Catherine," he said as they regrouped in his office. "She knows most of our major shareholders personally from her HR days." Zarya nodded. "Good idea. We need every connection we can leverage." "Meanwhile," Zora added, "I think we should accelerate the Empath AI announcement. Move it up to tomorrow instead of next week." "That's risky," Alexander cautioned. "The system hasn't completed final testing." "Riskier than losing control of both our companies?" Zora challenged. "We need to change the narrative immediately." Alexander considered this, then nodded. "You're right. Let's do it." As they separated to make their calls, Alexander reflected on how quickly they had coalesced into a unified front against Chen's threat. Their shared leadership might be unconventional, but in this crisis, it was proving to be remarkably effective. Catherine arrived within the hour, her retirement apparently forgotten as she stepped back into the corporate battlefield. "Elliot always was opportunistic," she observed after being briefed, "but this is bold, even for him." "He thinks the 3 CEO structure makes us vulnerable," Alexander explained, "that shareholders will see it as a sign of weakness rather than strength." Catherine's gaze moved from Alexander to the twins, who were huddled with the marketing team preparing the Empath AI announcement. "And what do you think? Are you stronger together or not?" "Definitely stronger," Alexander replied without hesitation. "I didn't expect it, but we complement each other in ways I couldn't have predicted." Catherine smiled slightly. "Life has a way of bringing people together when they need each other most, even if it takes 20 years. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of strategy sessions, investor calls, and press briefings. Alexander leveraged every relationship he had built over decades in business, emphasizing Pinnacle's long-term vision and the transformative potential of the integration with Horizon. Zora crafted a compelling narrative about the future of emotional AI, positioning Nova's tender offer as a desperate attempt to prevent Pinnacle Horizon from dominating this emerging market. Zarya worked with the technical team to prepare a limited but impressive demonstration of Empath AI for key investors and technology analysts. By evening, they had secured commitments from enough shareholders to block Nova's immediate takeover attempt, but the situation remained precarious. They gathered in Alexander's office to regroup, all showing signs of fatigue after the intense day. "We've bought some time," Alexander acknowledged, loosening his tie. "But Chen won't back down easily. He's wanted Pinnacle since the day he left. Then we need to make Pinnacle Horizon too valuable for shareholders to risk selling," Zora said, pacing energetically despite her exhaustion. "Tomorrow's Empath AI demonstration has to be flawless." Zarya looked up from her tablet, her expression troubled. "There's a problem with that. The system is showing inconsistencies in the final testing. Nothing catastrophic, but enough that a public demonstration could be risky." Alexander and Zora exchanged concerned glances. "How serious?" Alexander asked. "The core emotional recognition is solid," Zarya explained, "but the response algorithms occasionally generate inappropriate outputs when faced with complex emotional states." "Can it be fixed before tomorrow?" Zora pressed. Zarya shook her head. "Not with confidence. We need at least 3 more days of calibration." "We don't have 3 days," Alexander said grimly. "Chen has scheduled a press conference for tomorrow afternoon. He'll be making his case directly to the public and shareholders." A heavy silence fell over the room as they confronted their dilemma. Demonstrating a flawed system could backfire spectacularly, confirming the very doubts Chen was trying to sow about their leadership. But without something concrete to show investors, they risked losing critical support. "What if we pivot?" Zora suggested suddenly. "Instead of a full demonstration, we offer a technical preview for a select group of analysts, focusing on the core technology without the response generation that's causing problems." Zarya considered this. "That could work. We showcase the emotional recognition capability, which is truly revolutionary, while being transparent about the ongoing refinement of the response algorithms." "Transparency as a strength rather than hiding a weakness," Alexander mused. It's counter to typical corporate strategy, but it might just work in this case. They quickly restructured their plan, identifying the most influential technology analysts and arranging for an exclusive preview the following morning. The event would be small and controlled, allowing them to manage expectations while still generating excitement about Empath AI's potential. As midnight approached, Catherine insisted they all get some rest. "You can't fight a corporate war if you're collapsing from exhaustion," she admonished, her tone brooking no argument. Alexander offered his penthouse guest rooms to the twins, who accepted gratefully, recognizing the practicality of staying close given the early morning ahead. As they prepared to leave his office, Alexander's phone rang, an unlisted number. "Preston," he answered tersely. "Hello, Alex." Elliot Chen's smooth voice filled the line. "I thought we should talk, mentor to former mentee." Alexander put the call on speaker, nodding to the twins. "There's nothing to discuss, Elliot. Your tender offer will be rejected." Chen laughed softly. "You always were confident, sometimes beyond reason. But I wonder if your new partners share that confidence." The twins stepped closer to the phone, their expressions hardening at Chen's condescending tone. "We're quite confident," Zora replied coolly. "In fact, we're looking forward to demonstrating exactly why your tender offer is both undervalued and ill-timed." "Ah, Dr. Davis," Chen responded, sounding amused. "Or should I say Dr. Davis's? I was hoping you'd be there. You know, I offered you both a very generous partnership with Nova just weeks ago. That offer could still be available, without the complication of Alexander's baggage." Alexander felt a chill at the implication. Did Chen somehow know about their personal history? "What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Chen?" Zarya asked, her voice carefully controlled. "Simply that you might have aligned yourselves with the wrong partner," Chen replied smoothly. "Alexander's time has passed. Pinnacle's innovation has stagnated under his leadership. You deserve better collaborators for your brilliant technology. Our partnership with Alexander and Pinnacle is based on shared vision and complementary strengths," Zora stated firmly. "It's not open to renegotiation." "Even if I could offer you complete control of your technology," Chen pressed. "No compromise, no shared leadership, no answering to a man who—" "That's enough, Elliot," Alexander interrupted, his voice sharp. "Your divide-and-conquer strategy won't work. We stand united." After a brief pause, Chen's tone hardened. "Very well. I'll see you at the shareholders' meeting next week. Sleep well, Alex, while you still can." The call ended, leaving a tense silence in its wake. Alexander looked at the twins, uncertainty flickering across his features. He seemed to be hinting at something. "About our history." Zora nodded slowly. "I caught that too. But how could he know? We've never discussed it publicly." "Corporate espionage is his specialty," Alexander said grimly. "He might have had someone dig into our backgrounds looking for leverage." "If he knows," Zarya pointed out, "he could use it to undermine shareholder confidence. Suggest our partnership is based on personal history rather than business logic." Alexander rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of past decisions bearing down on him. "I'm sorry. I never imagined my choice 20 years ago would create vulnerability for you now." The twins exchanged one of their silent communications before Zora spoke. "Maybe it's time we controlled the narrative ourselves." "What do you mean?" Alexander asked. "If Chen is planning to expose our history, perhaps we should reveal it first," Zarya suggested. "On our terms." Alexander stared at them, shocked. "You want to publicly acknowledge that I refuse to adopt you?" "Not as a confession or an accusation," Zora clarified, "but as context for our current partnership, a full-circle moment that demonstrates our ability to move beyond past differences for a greater purpose." "It's risky," Alexander warned. "The press could spin it negatively, make me look heartless, or suggest you're motivated by revenge." "Or," Zarya countered, It could be a powerful story of reconciliation and shared vision that transcends personal history, the kind of authentic narrative that resonates in today's business environment. Alexander considered this, seeing the strategic wisdom in their suggestion despite his instinctive reluctance to expose such a personal failing. If we do this, we do it together. Complete transparency, no spin. The twins nodded in unison. Together, they agreed. As they finally departed for a few hours of rest, Alexander felt a curious mixture of apprehension and relief. The prospect of publicly acknowledging his past rejection of the twins was daunting, and yet, the thought of no longer carrying that secret, of facing it openly alongside the very women he had once turned away, offered a strange kind of liberation. Morning arrived too quickly, bringing with it final preparations for the technical preview. The selected analysts arrived at Pinnacle Tower at 9, ushered into a specially prepared demonstration room where Zarya led them through Empath AI's emotional recognition capabilities. The presentation was a measured success, not the spectacular launch they had originally planned, but enough to generate positive buzz and counteract some of Chen's narrative about their supposedly failing leadership experiment. By noon, technology blogs were publishing the first impressions, most expressing cautious optimism about the potential of emotion-based AI. The stock price stabilized, and several wavering shareholders reaffirmed their support for the current management. But the real test was still to come. At 3 o'clock, they would hold a press conference of their own, directly competing with Chen's scheduled announcement. And they would reveal the truth about their shared past, a high-stakes gamble that could either cement their leadership or provide Chen with the ammunition he needed to topple them. Pinnacle Tower's press room had never seemed so small to Alexander as it did that afternoon. Typically used for quarterly earnings announcements and product launches, the space was now packed beyond capacity with journalists, industry analysts, and camera crews. Word had spread that the Pinnacle Horizon leadership would be making a major announcement, and the speculation ranged from a breakthrough product reveal to a defensive merger against Nova's hostile takeover attempt. None of the rumors had come close to the truth. Backstage, Alexander adjusted his tie for the 5th time, an uncharacteristic display of nervousness. "Are we certain about this?" he asked, glancing at the twins, who were reviewing their notes nearby. "Having second thoughts?" Zora asked, looking up. Alexander sighed. "I'm concerned about the impact on both of you. This will become part of your public narrative forever. The CEOs who were rejected as children. I don't want that to overshadow your accomplishments." Zarya's expression softened slightly. "We've lived with this story our entire lives, Alexander. Making it public doesn't change what happened, only who knows about it. And we're not positioning this as a tragedy," Zora added firmly. "It's a story of connection lost and found, of different paths that ultimately converged." Catherine entered the room, having just checked the press attendance. "It's a full house out there, and Chen's people are streaming his announcement simultaneously on a split screen in several news outlets." "Perfect," Zora said with grim satisfaction. "Maximum contrast between our approaches." Alexander checked his watch. "It's time." The three of them walked onto the small stage together, presenting a united front as camera flashes erupted around them. Alexander stepped to the podium first, scanning the room with the confident gaze that had become his trademark over decades of business leadership. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "Normally we'd be here to announce a new product or business strategy. Today is different. Today we want to share something more personal, a story that provides context for our unique leadership structure and vision for Pinnacle Horizon's future." He paused, meeting the curious gazes of the assembled reporters. 20 years ago, I made a decision that I've come to recognize as the greatest mistake of my life. A decision based on ambition and fear rather than human connection." A murmur ran through the audience as Alexander continued. "I was asked to consider adopting 2 5-year-old girls, twins who had lost their mother, an employee of my then-young company. I refused, believing that children would distract from my singular focus on building Pinnacle Technologies. The room fell silent, journalists suddenly motionless, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented in corporate communications. Those twins were separated in the foster system, Alexander continued, his voice steady despite the emotion behind his words. They grew up apart, but through extraordinary resilience and brilliance, they reunited in college, earned advanced degrees, and founded a revolutionary AI company based on emotional intelligence, something I, ironically, demonstrated very little of when they needed it most. He gestured to Zora and Zaria, who stepped forward to join him at the podium. Dr. Zora and Dr. Zaria Davis are those twins, and in one of life's most unexpected turns, their company, Horizon Analytics, has now integrated with Pinnacle Technologies in a partnership that represents not just business synergy, but a kind of reconciliation I never imagined possible. The press room erupted in exclamations and questions as reporters realized the implications of this revelation. Alexander raised a hand for silence, then stepped aside to allow Zora to speak. "What Alexander has shared is true," she confirmed, her voice clear and controlled. "But this isn't a story about victimhood or even forgiveness. It's about how different life paths can ultimately lead to shared purpose. Zaria and I developed our emotional AI technology partly because of our experiences growing up separated from each other. We understand, in a deeply personal way, the importance of human connection and emotional intelligence." Zaria took her turn at the microphone. "Our integration with Pinnacle isn't about the past. It's about combining our emotional intelligence frameworks with Pinnacle's market position to create technology that truly understands and serves human needs. The fact that this partnership arose from such unlikely beginnings makes it more meaningful, not less legitimate." Alexander returned to the podium. "You may be wondering why we've chosen to share this personal history today. The answer is simple: transparency. In the face of Nova Dynamics' hostile takeover attempt, we want shareholders and the public to understand exactly who we are and why we believe so strongly in our shared vision." He looked directly into the main camera. "Elliot Chen, my former protege, is at this moment holding his own press conference, attempting to undermine confidence in our leadership. He recently suggested to us privately that he knows about our shared history and implied he might use it against us. We've chosen to tell our own story rather than allow it to be weaponized." The questions came in a flood after that, journalists calling out over each other in their eagerness to explore this unprecedented corporate disclosure. The three CEOs handled them with remarkable composure, neither sensationalizing nor minimizing the complexity of their relationship. When asked if the integration had been motivated by guilt or obligation, Alexander was forthright. "Initially, I approached it as a business necessity. Pinnacle needed Horizon's technology to remain competitive. But working with Zora and Zaria has become something more, a chance to build something meaningful together, despite our complicated beginning." "And from your perspective?" a reporter asked the twins. "Is this partnership in any way about making Alexander Preston atone for his past decision?" Zora smiled slightly. "If we wanted revenge, we had better options. We could have taken our technology to Nova, or continued with our original acquisition plan. This integration represents a genuine belief that together, we can create more value than separately." "Even with someone who once rejected you?" the reporter pressed. "Especially with him," Zaria replied calmly. "Our emotional AI is built on the principle that people are more than their worst decisions, that growth and connection are always possible. We're living that principle through this partnership." Across town, Elliot Chen's press conference was reportedly losing viewers by the minute as the media focus shifted overwhelmingly to Pinnacle Tower's remarkable disclosure. By the time Alexander, Zora, and Zaria concluded their session, Pinnacle Reunion was trending on social media, and financial analysts were already publishing revised assessments of the company's prospects. Back in Alexander's office, the three collapsed into chairs, emotionally drained but relieved. James entered with a tablet displaying real-time market reactions. "Stock's up 8%, he reported, looking slightly stunned. "And Nova's is down. Chen's announcement barely registered with the press. They're all focused on our story." "How's the narrative playing?" Zora asked, her strategic mind still at work despite her exhaustion. James scrolled through several screens. Mixed but mostly positive. Business press is calling it the most human moment in corporate history. Some cynics are suggesting it's a calculated distraction, but they're in the minority. Most importantly, several major shareholders who were considering Nova's offer have publicly reaffirmed their support for our leadership. Alexander exhaled slowly. "And Chen?" "Reportedly furious," James said with a hint of satisfaction. "His team was blindsided. They were planning to reveal your history, but as a scandal, not a reconciliation story. You completely changed the narrative." Catherine appeared in the doorway, her expression proud. "That was the bravest thing I've seen in 40 years of corporate life," she told them. "All three of you." Alexander smiled tiredly. "Not brave, necessary. And truthful," Zarya added quietly. "For perhaps the first time since we re-entered each other's lives." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of media coverage and investor communications. The story of Pinnacle's 3 CEOs, the man who had once refused to adopt 2 orphaned girls now partnering with those same girls as brilliant adult women, captured public imagination in a way no corporate news had for years. Some cynics dismissed it as a masterful PR move, but the majority of coverage recognized the genuine human complexity of the situation. Business schools immediately began drafting case studies on the unconventional leadership structure and the bold transparency strategy. By the end of the week, Nova officially withdrew its tender offer, unable to compete with the wave of positive sentiment surrounding Pinnacle Horizon. Chen issued a terse statement congratulating his former mentor on a storytelling coup, while reiterating his belief that Pinnacle's long-term prospects remained questionable under its experimental leadership. Alexander, reading the statement in his office, merely smiled. Chen had always been a sore loser. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Zora and Zarya entered, both looking more relaxed than they had in weeks. "We just got off a call with the development team," Zora announced. "The response algorithm issues have been resolved. Empath AI is ready for full deployment." "That's excellent news," Alexander replied, genuinely pleased. "The market is eager for the official launch after the preview." "There's something else we wanted to discuss," Zarya said, her tone more hesitant. "About your offer regarding your estate." Alexander straightened in his chair. They had not mentioned his proposal since that dinner at his penthouse, and with the Nova crisis, he had assumed it was a topic for later consideration. "We've given it a lot of thought," Zora continued, "and while we appreciate the gesture, we don't think it's the right approach." Alexander nodded slowly, working to mask his disappointment. "I understand. It was perhaps presumptuous of me." "Let me finish," Zora interrupted gently. "We don't want your personal estate, but we'd like to propose an alternative." Zarya took up the explanation. "We'd like the 3 of us to establish a foundation together. Not just the Janelle Davis Foundation we already discussed, but something broader. A foundation focused on supporting children in the foster system, particularly those with potential in STEM fields, and on developing emotional intelligence technology for social good." "We'd all contribute," Zora added, "financially and in terms of direction and vision. A true collaboration, looking forward rather than back." Alexander felt something tighten in his chest. Not pain, but a strange, unfamiliar warmth. "I'd be honored," he said simply. "Good," Zarya smiled. "We've already started drafting some initial concepts. We'd like your input when you have time." As they left, Alexander remained at his desk, contemplating how thoroughly his life had changed in the span of a few months. From isolated CEO defending his corporate kingdom to part of a 3-person leadership team and now potential co-founder of a foundation with the very women he had once refused to welcome into his life. The irony was profound, but so was the opportunity for redemption, not through erasing the past, but by creating something meaningful from it. Something that might help other children avoid the separation the Davis twins had endured and perhaps help him finally build the legacy that really mattered. 6 months after the integration of Pinnacle Technologies and Horizon Analytics, the company held a celebration at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The official occasion was the successful launch of Empath AI, which had exceeded even their optimistic projections, capturing substantial market share and generating enthusiastic reviews from both technical analysts and end users. But unofficially, it was also a celebration of their survival as a leadership team, a milestone few in the business world had expected them to reach. Alexander moved through the elegant Temple of Dender space, exchanging pleasantries with board members, key clients, and industry partners. From across the room, he spotted Zora charming a group of investors with her characteristic blend of visionary thinking and sharp wit. Nearby, Zaria was deep in conversation with the chief scientific officer of a major healthcare company, likely discussing potential applications of their emotional intelligence algorithms in patient care. "They're remarkable women," Catherine observed, appearing at his elbow with a glass of champagne. "You look almost paternal when you watch them." Alexander accepted the champagne with a wry smile. 20 years too late for that. "Perhaps," Catherine conceded. "But there are many ways to build meaningful connections. You three have found yours." She wasn't wrong. In the months since their public disclosure, Alexander, Zora, and Zaria had developed a relationship that defied easy categorization. They were business partners, certainly, equals in the boardroom and complementary in their approaches to leadership. But they had also become something more personal, not family in the traditional sense, but people who shared a profound connection and a complex history they no longer sought to hide. Their weekly dinners at Mario's had become a ritual, a space where they could discuss matters beyond quarterly projections and product roadmaps. Alexander had learned about the twins' foster experiences in greater detail, while they had come to understand the childhood that had shaped his own emotional limitations. They had visited Janelle Davis's grave together on the anniversary of her death, a quiet acknowledgement of the woman whose life and passing had connected them, however circuitously, and they had made remarkable progress on their joint foundation, which they had decided to name Convergence, a reference to both their personal journeys and the emotional technological integration at the heart of their business vision. "Alexander," Zora called, waving him over to her group. "The Secretary of Education is asking about our educational initiatives. You should join us." As he excused himself from Catherine and made his way across the room, Alexander reflected on how naturally they had fallen into their complementary roles. Zora, with her outgoing personality and strategic vision, excelled at building external relationships. Zaria's technical brilliance and quieter demeanor made her the perfect leader for their research and development teams, and Alexander's decades of business experience provided the operational stability that allowed their innovations to thrive. The arrangement that had once seemed so radical, 3 CEOs sharing leadership of a major technology company, was now being studied in business schools and emulated by other organizations seeking to balance diverse perspectives at the highest levels. Later in the evening, as the celebration wound down, Alexander found himself standing between the twins as they addressed the remaining guests. "Thank you all for sharing this milestone with us," Zora began. "6 months ago, many of you probably had doubts about our unconventional leadership structure. Some of you may have placed bets on how quickly we'd fail," Zaria added with a small smile, earning appreciative laughter from the crowd. "I know I had my own doubts," Alexander admitted, "but what we've accomplished together has exceeded anything we could have achieved separately." "Pinnacle Horizon isn't just about integrating 2 companies," Zora continued. "It's about recognizing that technological innovation without emotional intelligence is incomplete. And that leadership without diverse perspectives is limited, Zaria added. Alexander took a moment to look at the women standing beside him. Brilliant, resilient, and now his partners in every sense except the familial one he had once rejected. Sometimes the most meaningful connections come from the most unlikely beginnings, he said, lifting his glass. To convergence. The crowd echoed the toast, unaware of the multiple layers of meaning it held for the three people at the center of the gathering. As the guests began to depart, a tall man in an impeccably tailored suit approached their group. Quite the success story, Elliot Chen observed, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Congratulations are in order, it seems. Elliot, Alexander acknowledged with a nod. I'm surprised to see you here. Your board chairman invited me, Chen replied smoothly. Professional courtesy, I suppose. Besides, I was curious to see how your experiment was progressing. Zora stepped forward, extending her hand with perfect poise. Mr. Chen, thank you for coming. I trust Nova is doing well? The subtle emphasis on well rather than great or excellently did not go unnoticed. Nova Dynamics had seen its stock price decline since the failed takeover attempt, while Pinnacle Horizons continued to rise. We have several promising initiatives in development, Chen replied, shaking her hand briefly, though none with quite the personal backstory of your empath AI. The technology stands on its own merits, Zaria stated quietly but firmly. The backstory simply explains our unique perspective on emotional intelligence. Chen nodded, conceding the point with apparent grace. Indeed, and I must admit your transparent approach to the situation was masterful. Turning what could have been a scandal into an asset, I almost applauded despite myself. It wasn't a strategy, Elliot, Alexander said. It was the truth, something you might consider trying occasionally. Chen's smile tightened. Always the mentor, aren't you, Alex? Even now. He glanced between the three of them. Well, I won't intrude on your celebration any longer. I look forward to our continued competition. As he walked away, Zora turned to Alexander with a raised eyebrow. He's still angry. And still dangerous, Alexander cautioned. Nova may have withdrawn the tender offer, but Elliot won't give up so easily. He'll be watching for any sign of weakness or conflict between us. Then we'll have to disappoint him, Zaria said simply. The following Monday, they gathered in the redesigned executive suite, a space that had once been Alexander's exclusive domain, but now housed all three CEOs in connected but distinct offices surrounding a shared central workspace. The arrangement symbolized their leadership philosophy, autonomous in their areas of expertise but united in overall vision. The European launch is on schedule, Zora reported during their morning briefing. Regulatory approval came through faster than expected. And the healthcare adaptation? Alexander inquired, turning to Zaria. Clinical trials begin next month, she confirmed. The preliminary data from the pilot program is extremely promising. James entered with a tablet in hand, his expression serious. You should see this, he said, placing the device on the table between them. The screen displayed a business news headline. Nova Dynamics announces Project Empathy, new emotional AI platform in direct competition with Pinnacle Horizons Empath AI. They're claiming they've been developing it independently for years, James explained. But the architecture they've described sounds suspiciously similar to our system. Zora frowned, scanning the article. This reeks of industrial espionage. They couldn't acquire us, so they're trying to copy us. Can they do that? Alexander asked, looking at Zaria. How protected is our approach? We have strong patents on the core architecture, she replied, her brow furrowed in concentration. But the concept of emotional AI isn't exclusive to us. The question is whether they've genuinely developed their own approach or stolen aspects of ours. We need to investigate, Alexander decided. Discreetly. If Chen has crossed legal lines, we'll address it through proper channels. If not, we'll have to out-innovate him. Again. I have contacts at 2 firms that recently left Nova for other companies, James offered. They might be willing to share insights about Project Empathy's development timeline. Good, Alexander nodded. And Zarya, can you assemble a team to analyze their technical claims once more details are released? We need to know if they're infringing on our patents. Already on it, she confirmed. I've asked our legal team to prepare a comprehensive review of our intellectual property protections as well. Zora, who had been unusually quiet, looked up from the tablet with a determined expression. We should accelerate the Empath AI 2.0 development. If Nova is entering this space, we need to maintain our technological lead. That would require significant resources, Alexander cautioned. Resources currently allocated to other initiatives. Which is exactly what Chen wants, Zarya observed. To force us into reactive mode, disrupting our strategic roadmap. Alexander nodded slowly. You're right. We need to respond without being reactive. He turned to James. Prepare a comparison of our current Empath AI capabilities versus what Nova is claiming. Let's understand exactly where we stand before making any resource allocation decisions. As James left to gather the requested information, the three CEOs exchanged thoughtful glances. This was their first major competitive challenge since stabilizing their leadership structure, and how they handled it would set the tone for their future responses to market threats. Chen is counting on us to either panic or become complacent, Zora noted. He's trying to exploit potential fault lines in our leadership. Then we'll prove him wrong, Alexander said firmly, on both counts. Later that afternoon, they reconvened to review James's findings. The comparison revealed that while Nova's announced system claimed several capabilities similar to Empath AI, their approach appeared to be fundamentally different, less sophisticated but potentially adequate for certain market segments. They're positioning it as a simpler, more accessible alternative to our system, James explained. Lower price point, easier implementation, fewer features. Zarya studied the technical specifications with a critical eye. Their approach is clever, but limited. They've essentially created a pattern-matching system with pre-programmed responses, not true emotional intelligence. But will the market understand the difference? Alexander asked. Or will they see it as good enough at a lower price point? That's the key question, Zora agreed. We need to articulate the difference clearly without sounding defensive or elitist. They spent the next several hours developing a comprehensive strategy, not just a reactive response to Nova's announcement, but a proactive plan to strengthen their market position and accelerate their innovation timeline without abandoning their core strategic initiatives. By evening, they had aligned on an approach that balanced immediate competitive needs with long-term vision. Alexander would focus on reinforcing relationships with key clients and partners, ensuring they understood the substantial differences between Empath AI and Nova's offering. Zora would lead a targeted marketing campaign highlighting the real-world impact of their more sophisticated emotional intelligence system, and Zarya would guide a focused enhancement of specific Empath AI features that would most clearly differentiate their technology from Nova's approach. As they prepared to leave for the day, Alexander paused at the door of their shared workspace. This is what Chen never understood about leadership, he observed. It's not about having all the answers yourself. It's about bringing together the right perspectives to find better solutions than any individual could develop alone. Zora smiled slightly. Is that wisdom from experience, Mr. Preston? Hard-earned, he confirmed with a self-deprecating smile. And about 20 years too late. But not too late entirely, Zarya noted quietly. That's the thing about time. It keeps offering new opportunities if you're paying attention. Alexander nodded, struck once again by how their unusual relationship had evolved into something none of them could have predicted. Not family, not merely colleagues, but partners in a shared journey that somehow managed to incorporate their complex past without being defined by it. Dinner at Mario's tomorrow, he suggested, to celebrate surviving our first post-integration competitive crisis. The twins exchanged one of their silent communications before Zora answered. Actually, we'd like to host this time, At our place in Brooklyn, if you're willing to cross the bridge." Alexander raised an eyebrow, surprised by the invitation. In all their months of working together and their weekly dinners, he had never visited their home, a boundary he had respected without question. "I'd be honored," he said simply. The following evening, Alexander's driver delivered him to a beautifully restored brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. The twins' home reflected their personalities, warm, intellectually rich, and elegantly appointed without being showy. Art from around the world adorned the walls, and bookshelves overflowed with volumes ranging from technical manuals to classical literature. The dinner was excellent, prepared by Zora, who apparently enjoyed cooking as a creative outlet away from technology and business strategy. The conversation flowed easily, covering topics far beyond their work together. Books they had read, places they hoped to visit, philosophical questions about the future of human-AI interaction. After dinner, Zaria led them to a small garden behind the brownstone, a surprisingly lush space in the heart of the city. As they settled into comfortable chairs with glasses of cognac, Alexander found himself more relaxed than he had been in years, perhaps decades. "I've been thinking about our foundation," Zora said, breaking a comfortable silence. "Convergence. We've made good progress on the structure and funding, but I keep coming back to the question of leadership." "What about it?" Alexander asked. "We'll need someone to run it day to day," she explained. "Someone who shares our vision but isn't divided between the foundation and Pinnacle Horizon." Alexander nodded thoughtfully. "I've been considering that too. I have a few candidates in mind. Experienced non-profit executives with backgrounds in both education and technology." "We were thinking of someone specific," Zaria said quietly. "Someone who knows all of us and understands both the business and human dimensions of our vision." Alexander raised an eyebrow questioningly. "Catherine," Zora stated. "She's perfect for it. Experience in human resources, personal knowledge of our story, respected in the business community but with a genuine commitment to social impact. And she's bored in retirement," Alexander added with a smile, warming to the idea immediately. "She's been looking for a meaningful project. This could be perfect." As they discussed the possibility further, Alexander felt a deep sense of rightness about the suggestion. Catherine had been the one to bring the twins into his life 20 years ago. Now she might help them extend the impact of their unlikely reconciliation to other children facing similar circumstances. 1 year to the day after Pinnacle Technologies and Horizon Analytics announced their integration, Alexander stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria. Behind him, a massive screen displayed the newly unveiled logo of the Convergence Foundation, 3 intertwined circles in shades of blue, green, and gold. "Today marks not just the anniversary of our corporate integration," he began, looking out over the assembled guests, "but the official launch of an initiative that means even more to my co-CEOs and me personally." The crowd, a mix of business leaders, educators, politicians, and non-profit directors, listened attentively. In the front row sat Catherine Wells, elegantly dressed and radiating quiet pride. Beside her were the twins' former foster parents, the professor and his wife who had supported Zora through her teenage years, and the Brooklyn couple who had raised Zaria. Despite the complexities of those relationships, the Davis sisters had insisted on including them in this milestone. The Convergence Foundation represents our commitment to ensuring that every child, regardless of circumstances, has the opportunity to reach their full potential, Alexander continued. With an initial endowment of $50 million and ongoing funding from Pinnacle Horizon, we will focus on 3 core initiatives. He gestured to Zora, who joined him at the podium. Our education initiative will provide scholarships and mentoring for children in foster care, with a particular focus on those interested in STEM fields, she explained. Having navigated that path ourselves, my sister and I understand both the challenges and the transformative power of educational opportunity. Zaria stepped forward next. Our technology initiative will develop and distribute adaptive learning systems based on our emotional intelligence algorithms, designed specifically for children who have experienced trauma or disruption. These systems will help educators better understand and support students' emotional needs alongside their academic development. Alexander returned to the microphone. And our family support initiative will work to prevent unnecessary family separations while providing resources for foster and adoptive families to maintain sibling connections when children must enter care. He paused, his gaze finding the twins in a moment of silent acknowledgement. Because we know firsthand that those connections are irreplaceable, and their loss creates wounds that never fully heal. The room was silent, many guests visibly moved by the personal dimension underlying the professional announcement. Alexander cleared his throat slightly before continuing. It is my great pleasure to introduce the founding executive director of the Convergence Foundation, a woman whose wisdom and compassion have guided all three of us at critical moments in our lives. Catherine Wells. Catherine rose to enthusiastic applause, joining them on stage with the grace and presence that had made her such an effective HR director for decades. "Thank you, Alexander," she said, taking the podium, "and thank you, Zora and Zaria, for trusting me with this extraordinary opportunity." As Catherine outlined the Foundation's operational plans, Alexander stepped back, standing shoulder to shoulder with the Davis twins. He recalled their first meeting in Pinnacle's conference room 20 years earlier, two small girls with matching yellow dresses and wary eyes, and his own callous dismissal of the connection that might have been. Life rarely offered true second chances, he reflected, but sometimes it provided alternative paths to connection, different but no less meaningful than the ones initially rejected. After the formal program concluded, the evening transitioned to a reception. Alexander found himself approached by a distinguished-looking man with silver hair and kind eyes, Dr. Martin Hayes, the professor who had been Zora's final foster parent. "Mr. Preston," he greeted, extending his hand. "I've wanted to meet you for some time." "Dr. Hayes," Alexander replied, shaking his hand. "Zora speaks very highly of you and your wife. Your support clearly made a tremendous difference in her life." Hayes nodded, his expression thoughtful. "We did our best, but I've often wondered how different things might have been if the girls hadn't been separated, if someone had taken them both." The gentle reproach was unmistakable, though delivered without malice. Alexander met his gaze directly. "As have I, especially in recent years. Yet here we are," Hayes observed, gesturing to the room where the twins moved confidently among the guests, their natural leadership evident even in this social context. "They've become remarkable women despite it all." "Because of it all," Alexander corrected, echoing Zora's words from months earlier. "Their experiences shaped them, as did your guidance." Hayes studied him for a moment. "You know, when Zora first told me about the integration with Pinnacle, I was concerned. I remembered how devastated she was when she discovered as a teenager that a wealthy CEO had refused to adopt them. She never named you, but I knew the story affected her deeply." Alexander nodded, accepting the difficult truth. "It's a responsibility I'll carry forever." "And yet," Hayes continued, "when I see the three of you together now, there's something fitting about it. Not what could have been, but what has become instead." Before Alexander could respond, Zaria approached, champagne glass in hand. "I see you've met Martin," she said to Alexander. "He was the first person Zora called when we reunited at MIT." "He's been telling me about teenage Zora," Alexander replied with a small smile. "I'm gathering she was as formidable then as she is now." Zaria laughed, a warm sound that still surprised Alexander when he heard it. Worse, she organized a protest when her high school tried to cut the advanced mathematics program. At 16. "And you?" Alexander asked. "What were you like as a teenager?" "Quieter," Zaria admitted. "I lived in books and computer code. My foster parents." She glanced across the room where the Brooklyn couple stood chatting with Catherine. "They weren't unkind, but they didn't really understand me. I think they found me somewhat alien." Hayes squeezed her shoulder gently. "Their loss. I would have been proud to foster both Davis sisters." The conversation shifted to the Foundation's educational initiatives, with Hayes offering insights from his decades in academia. Alexander listened attentively, struck by how easily they had moved from the painful past to the constructive present. There was no pretense that the wounds hadn't existed, but neither were they allowed to define the current relationship. Later, as the event wound down, Alexander found himself standing with the twins near the ballroom's windows, Manhattan's lights twinkling beyond the glass. They had done this often over the past year, found quiet moments to connect amid the whirlwind of their shared professional lives. "Catherine was perfect tonight," Zora observed. "The Foundation is in good hands." Alexander nodded. "She's been waiting for this opportunity, I think. A chance to make a difference on a larger scale." "Like we all have," Zaria added quietly. The weight of her words hung in the air, an acknowledgement of how their unlikely partnership had provided each of them with something they hadn't realized they were seeking. For the twins, it was the chance to transform their personal experience into systemic change. For Alexander, it was the opportunity to build a legacy beyond corporate success, one based on human connection rather than market dominance. "I had a conversation with an interesting potential donor earlier," Zora said, changing the subject. "The CEO of Brighton Technologies. They're developing virtual reality systems for educational applications." "Gerald Brighton?" Alexander asked, surprised. "He's notoriously reclusive. I didn't realize he was here." "Apparently our story resonated with him," Zaria explained. "He was a foster child himself, though he's kept that private until now. He's interested in funding a joint initiative between our foundation and his company, virtual reality experiences that help foster children maintain connections with siblings when they're placed in different homes." Alexander felt a surge of admiration for how the twins continually transformed their personal pain into innovative solutions. "That's remarkable. VR could create shared experiences even when physical proximity isn't possible." "Exactly," Zora nodded enthusiastically. "We're meeting with his technical team next week to explore the possibilities." As they discussed the potential of the Brighton partnership, Alexander marveled at how naturally they had fallen into their complementary roles, not just as business leaders but as architects of social impact. Zora's visionary thinking and networking skills, Zaria's technical brilliance and thoughtful implementation, his own experience and business acumen. Together, they formed something greater than any could have achieved alone. The thought reminded him of a question that had been nagging at him for months. "May I ask you something personal?" he ventured. The twins exchanged a brief glance before Zaria nodded. "Of course. When you first approached Pinnacle, when you proposed the partnership that eventually became our integration, was it truly just business? Or was there some part of you that wanted to, I don't know, close a circle somehow?" Zora considered the question seriously. "Initially, it was primarily business. Your company needed our technology, and we needed your market position and resources." "But we did recognize the irony," Zaria admitted, "and perhaps there was something fitting about creating a connection that had been refused before. Not a replacement for what might have been," Zora clarified, "but a different kind of relationship. One based on mutual respect and shared vision rather than dependence or obligation." Alexander nodded slowly. "That makes sense. And now? A year later?" The twins exchanged another of their silent communications before Zora answered. "Now it feels like we're exactly where we're supposed to be. Building something meaningful together, but as equals. As family of choice rather than circumstance," Zaria added softly. The phrase struck Alexander powerfully. Family of choice. Not the father-daughter's relationship that might have been, but something equally valid in its own way. A connection formed through conscious decision and ongoing commitment rather than biological accident or legal arrangement. I'm honored to be part of that choice, he said simply. As the last guests departed and the event staff began clearing the ballroom, Catherine joined their small group by the windows. Well, that was quite a success, she observed. The foundation has already received commitments for an additional $12 million in donations on top of your initial endowment. Your speech was perfect, Zora told her warmly. You captured exactly what we're trying to accomplish. It wasn't difficult, Catherine replied. The three of you have been remarkably clear in your vision. She studied them with the perceptive gaze that had made her such an effective HR director. You know, a year ago, I would never have predicted this outcome. I hoped for a successful business partnership, but this, she gestured between them. This is something else entirely. Family of choice, Alexander said, testing the phrase aloud. Catherine's eyes widened slightly, then crinkled with pleasure. Yes, that's it exactly. Not defined by what could have been, but by what you've chosen to build together. As they gathered their things and prepared to leave, Alexander felt a profound sense of contentment. The past year had transformed not just Pinnacle Technologies, but his understanding of success and connection. For decades, he had measured achievement in market share and profit margins, isolating himself in the process. Now he recognized that the true measure lay in relationships, the lives touched, the differences made, the bridges built where once there had been only walls. Outside the hotel, their 3 cars waited at the curb. Before they separated, Zora turned to Alexander. Brunch on Sunday? We're trying that new place in Dumbo. I'd like that, he replied. As he settled into the back seat of his car, Alexander watched the twins walk toward their own vehicle, their animated conversation suggesting they were already discussing some new idea or initiative. 20 years ago, he had refused to give them a home, believing children would distract from his singular focus on building Pinnacle Technologies. The irony was exquisite. 2 decades later, those same children, now brilliant women, had not only saved his company, but had expanded his vision of what success could mean. They had refused to be defined by his rejection, creating extraordinary lives through their own brilliance and determination. And in doing so, they had offered him a chance at connection he had never expected to find. Not the connection that might have been, but perhaps the one that was always meant to be. A relationship built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and the recognition that it's never too late to choose a different path. A family of choice, forged not in obligation but in the conscious decision to build something meaningful together, despite the painful past. As his car pulled away from the curb, Alexander smiled at the thought. Some mistakes couldn't be undone. Some opportunities, once refused, never returned in the same form. But sometimes, if you were fortunate beyond deserving, life offered not a second chance, but a different one. An alternative path to connection that proved equally meaningful in its own unique way. The Davis twins had saved Pinnacle Technologies. But more importantly, they had saved Alexander Preston from the isolation of his own making, not through forgiveness or forgetting, but through the profound act of creating something new from the ashes of what might have been. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.